Well, welcome once again to the JD Power Travel Podcast. I'm Michael Taylor. I'm the practice lead for travel at JD Power. And as always, joining me is Andrea Stokes, who's the head of our hospitality studies at JD Power. Hello, Andrea.
Hello.
And Jenny Corwin, who is our DCI, as I like to watch English or British television police procedurals. That's Deputy Chief Inspector, but in this case, it's the Director of Consumer Insights, Jenny Corwin.
Hello.
You could be in a, BBC police procedural. Did you ever thought about that, Jen?
Maybe in the next life.
Okay. All right. Well, I thought, the big news, of course, this past week or so has been the release of the hotel study. Which is a huge project that Andrea does every year. So, Andrea, why don't you give us the rundown of what happened there?
Sure. Thank you, Mike. Yes, so very happy to announce the results of our 25th hotel guest satisfaction study. Exciting results given the environment still. We are still in a pandemic, but the study results really showed how hotels got through the pandemic and how guests reacted to all of the changes at hotels during this time, whether positively or negatively. A couple of highlights include breakfast. So, through no fault of the hotels over the past year, they've had to adjust their food and beverage offerings, and especially in limited service hotels that typically offer complimentary breakfast. Essentially, that went away for many, many months during the pandemic, and guests certainly were not happy about it. They definitely, I think, look for hotel brands in the limited service space to offer some kind of complimentary breakfast. The breakfast that was offered during this time, maybe it was a grab and go lunch bag, maybe it was a very limited, whatever very limited food that the hotel could offer. Guests, in some segments of the industry just were not really happy with the quality and the variety that hotels had to provide. Again, through no faults of the hotels, there were a lot of restaurant closures. Hotels were included in that. A lot of local mandates and state mandates that hotels had to follow. But it definitely, the dissatisfaction with that definitely came out in the study. On the positive side, guests were very, very happy with housekeeping and the cleanliness of their guest rooms. We reported last year that cleanliness was really rated the highest it's ever been by guests in our study, and that continued this year. So kudos to housekeeping staff. We're really keeping up very high standards around cleanliness.
Andrea, I was just curious if there was any brands that seemingly did better with COVID or not.
Yeah, everyone all of the brands, the major chains face the same thing, and their individual hotel properties, whether they were managed by some of the large chains or, franchised by hotel owners. I think they did their best to follow any, chain standards that were put out around safety and cleanliness over the past year. Some, properties maybe had a little more to do depending on the state that they were in. But generally, guests certainly did see at least some of these protocols in place during their stay. Whether it was staff wearing masks or signage in the hotel around safety, social distancing, that kind of thing. So, almost all guests did notice at least, one of these protocols in place during their stay. So that's good.
All right. What other findings did you uncover in this one? What other topics of interest? I mean, obviously, COVID is the
Sure.
big one, but what else drove satisfaction among hotel stays?
Yes, I think, there's a lot of questions around, what will the future look like coming out of the pandemic? All of the changes that hotels made and changes that customers made, and what are the expectations? We do ask guests sort of what hotel amenities are nice to have versus need to have. And we've been asking that question in our study for many, many years. So we are able to sort of kind of predict, what hotel amenities are going to sort of increase in demand. Definitely, our study this year showed a big jump in guests saying that they need to have a smart TV in their hotel room. And so, I think that's because of the pandemic, and we've all been at home watching more TV and subscribing to more and more of these entertainment services. It's one thing that, I guess we predict that will be here to stay. If hotels can afford it, I guess I would tell hotel owners to make sure that they upgrade their TVs to smart TVs.
Now, does a smart TV mean that you can use your streaming services? I have to admit, I never use them in a hotel.
Exactly.
So if I remember
That's
Netflix, I can log on and watch my latest BBC police procedural.
Sure.
Is that how it works?
Yeah, Netflix, Disney Plus, right? Guests. Again, we've all been at home, sort of cooped up, and now when guests are going on the road, they definitely want to still be able to access their entertainment services and streaming.
I should ask Jenny, because as she is our resident tech person on this podcast, and she has a young child who I know loves Disney characters. I mean, is that something you do, Jen? Do you log onto your Disney Plus account and let Elsie look at her programming?
I think it's cool when they offer it. We generally travel with the iPad, so the internet is a little more important for us, right? We take the iPad, she can do her own thing, we can watch our stuff. But we do sometimes, we have logged in on smart TVs. I like to do that. I also like when you can hook up your own devices to the TV, right? So you could stream without logging in on their TV, because sometimes you forget, and then you leave yourself logged in, and that counts as one of your devices, or other people can mess up your algorithm. You got to be careful with when you leave to log yourself out of your smart TV.
Well, personally, I never do that. Although I'm so old, I've left compact discs in rental cars on many occasions. So I have some empty CD holders in my library that every time I think, I should listen to Joshua Tree again, and I realize, I left that in Las Vegas. So well, anyway, thank you, Andrea. I know it was a very busy week for you. This is always the busiest week that you have, I think, during the year, because you've got a lot of clients and a lot of hotels to talk about. So thank you very much for that update. So Jenny, there's been some news about mask mandate lawsuits, and of course, everybody is really concerned about the continued use of masks everywhere, especially on airlines. But maybe you can tell us a little bit about what's happening with the mask situation in travel.
Yeah, so I mean, as we know, there's the federal mask mandate. So and it includes transportation, right? Federal transportation and public transportation in general. So airlines, obviously, you're required to still wear a mask regardless of what your destination or your origin are doing. So that mandate is set to expire September 13th, and I think a lot of travel organizations and travelers are hoping that the government just lets it expire, honestly, at this point. So we've seen some articles recently that say things like 75% of altercations and unruly passenger reports on planes lately have been due to masks, right? So passengers not wanting to wear their masks, and then they're escalating, shouting matches, even physical violence, right? There's some lawsuits that are seeking to end the mask mandate early, while I think a lot of the industry is really just looking to let this mandate expire. because it has been extended through September 13th. So, I mean, obviously we're going to have to see what happens with the variants and vaccination rates and all of those things. But I think when we see this increase in unruly passengers, right, we are creating a different problem, right? There is the potential for escalating violence, and obviously no one wants to see that either. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out over the next couple of months. Hopefully it's only 2 more months, and then we don't have to worry about it anymore. But I guess we'll just have to see until then.
Yeah, and I can just add a little bit to that. In the studies that we've done through Passenger View, which is our on-airport cell phone survey, we've been able to estimate about 45 to 46% of people traveling are extraordinarily infrequent travelers. And I think that just the angst from the pandemic, and as you pointed out, the various laws and requirements for mask wearing may change. And then when those people meet in a confined space like an aircraft or an airport, I mean, tensions get ratcheted up pretty fast. So I have not seen a debate, at least in the data that we've been looking at. It's still a problem, as big a problem as it was 2 or 3 months ago. All right, well, thanks, Jen, for that. I thought for my particular topic, I would talk about the Canadian border reopening or semi-reopening, depending on how you want to look at it, from what side of the border you're standing on. But the Trudeau government up in Canada has decided that I believe August 9th will be the date in which some Canadians and some Americans can come across the border, although from the American side, that may not do you a lot of good because the Biden administration so far has not given any response. And then I noticed in the Canadian press release, or at least in the interview that the Minister of Tourism for Canada gave, she was practically begging the United States to say, hey, we're meeting you quite literally halfway. Please meet us the other way. And we've seen this in our data on the airline study. It really did affect the ability for us to rank Canadian airlines. We really had a hard time finding folks simply because the preponderance of our sample comes from the United States, even though we do have quite a few Canadians in that. So, from our procedural standpoint, I would like to see the Canadian border open on both sides, the American side. And also there's been some resumption of European travel, as announced by Delta and American this past week. But that's in very select areas. And then once you get there, you're going to have some restrictions about quarantining. And then also, just to get back to Canada, there are a myriad of exceptions to the rule about who's going to be allowed to stay, move about freely, and when you're going to be able to move about freely. But they are lifting the 3-day quarantine for people who have a full vaccination from the United States in Canada. So you won't have to stay at a hotel for 3 days. And just personally, I'm trying to schedule my annual trip to Scotland to go play golf. And at the moment, I'd have to stay for an entire week in one hotel and take a test a few times during that stay. So that doesn't really lend itself to a vacation if you got to stay in a hotel for a week. Anyway, well, I'd like to thank Jenny Corwin, our Director of Consumer Insights, and Andrea Stokes, who's the practice lead for hospitality at J.D. Power. And again, I'm Michael Taylor. I'm the practice lead for travel. You've been listening to the J.D. Power Travel Podcast. Thank you very much for your time. And if you'd like to learn more about J.D. Power and our practices, you can go to jdpower.com, go in the upper right-hand corner, hit businesses, and you'll scroll down to travel, and you'll be able to see the things that we've been working on, and have access to some of the press releases and press interviews that we've been doing on topics like COVID and topics that are not COVID related. And thankfully, we're getting more of the non-COVID related questions from the press these days. Well, thank you once again, and we'll see you next month.